Hey everyone, Ethan here. I've been playing Pokemon games for a majority of my life at this point. So much of my life has changed since I started playing, and yet I always find myself coming back to play no matter what stage of life I'm in. HeartGold and SoulSilver specifically are quite special to me because they're Generation 4 games, which is the generation I started with, and it was the first time I got both copies around release. I was so hyped for HGSS and everything surrounding it, with the TCG sets elevating that even higher since those are some of my favorite sets even still to this day. Anyways, this video is a follow-up to my previous video on Crystal version, which itself is a follow-up to my video on Gold and Silver, so I'd recommend watching those, especially the GS one for the most context surrounding these games and my thoughts on them. Speaking of Crystal though, as always, thank you for your support on that video with it sitting around 250 views. By the way, this is my first time making a video on a DS game, meaning there are two screens to look at instead of one. I chose this layout constantly showing the top screen big and the bottom screen small, and with little empty space since I believe that it looks the best while still showing everything. Hopefully you agree. As is tradition with my Pokemon videos, I'm going to provide context as to what exactly HeartGold and SoulSilver are. HeartGold and SoulSilver are dual remakes of Generation 2's Gold and Silver that add a surprising amount of brand new things to do and see. Despite being named after Gold and Silver, HGSS actually takes some cues from Crystal as well, mainly in its story. These remakes were released during the 4th generation of Pokemon, featuring the generation's mechanics and being built off of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. HGSS were made about 10 years after their originals, so there was quite some time to improve on the originals both through the natural generational shifts as well as polishing the experience to make this the definitive Johto experience. For this video, I played HeartGold, but the differences are as minimal as Gold and Silver's are. Let's talk about those changes that come with the 2-generation gap from 2 to 4. There's a lot that pertains to Pokemon innately, since Gens 3 and 4 refined how Pokemon should be balanced. As of Gen 3, all Pokemon now have passive abilities, which can come up in a variety of forms, and can range from being immune to a specific status or type, power up certain types of moves in certain situations, give certain stat boosts depending on the weather, and many more. To go along with this, there were a lot of changes under the hood to how a Pokemon gains stat points. An observable way to see this is through their nature. Natures also introduced in Gen 3 very simply make it so that each individual Pokemon is slightly more proficient in one stat and less in another, to attempt to make Pokemon even of the same species different from one another. Gen 4 brought a simple yet impactful change, making it so that every attacking move is now determined to be physical or special based on the move's action itself rather than the type it is. This enables each type to have both physical and special moves, and thus Pokemon of those types do not have to have their best attacking stat match their type in order for them to thrive. While not about the Pokemon themselves, Gen 3 did also introduce double battles, which has each side using 2 Pokemon at once instead of 1. These games, like most others, use these very sparingly, keeping the focus very much on single battles. The last of the generation's changes comes in the form of upgrade to the player. Gen 2 already made strides in expanding the bag, but Gen 3 and 4 made storage practically limitless, as well as adding more pockets for easier sorting. Gen 3 overhauled PC storage for your Pokemon, allowing boxes to be more visually interesting, as well as being able to swap Pokemon in and out of boxes without having to go through separate menus. Also, there are wallpapers now, which are cool. Gen 3 also added the running shoes for faster movement than walking without using the bike. HGSS uniquely has a button that you could press that will make you automatically run if it's toggled, which is such a fantastic quality of life feature, and it's bizarre that it didn't carry forward into later games. Before moving on, I want to mention changes that I would consider generational but aren't additions but rather method changes. A good and important example of this is how each game has you obtaining and usually even cultivating berries. GSC had you obtaining the now defunct version of the berries via the berry trees scattered throughout Johto and Kanto. In HGSS, these trees now exclusively house apricorns, with the berries being obtained in various different ways. The important part is that you're able to grow and thus make more berries via the berry pots item obtained after dealing with the pesky Sudowoodo. In terms of actually obtaining the berries, you can get the basic Oran and status healing berries from the Daily Lotto and Goldenrod, which despite the name can be done as many times as you want per day. And the type reducing berries are the primary gifts received through your mother saving and spending your hard-earned money. The only other example of a generational method change is how the game shoehorn in ways to change the forms of Pokemon. HGSS has Deoxys, Rotom, Giratina, and Shaman to worry about this time, with the meteorites for Deoxys being just outside of Pewter, the Rotom appliances being located in a room in Silphco, the Grisiosaur being locked away behind an event I'll talk about later, and the Gracidia being given to you if you bring Shaman to the flower shop in Goldenrod. As each generation adds more changeable forms of different Pokemon, the methods grow but are mostly eventually relegated to being condensed to one area or NPC. I am by no means going to mention these and all future ways to change your Pokemon forms, but wanted to mention it at least once. There were also some alterations and minor additions made to the story, although it is mostly the same as before. As a controversial change, the female playable character Chris from Crystal has been replaced by Lyra. I personally don't mind Lyra, but I don't play as female characters, so this change barely affects me. Whether you choose Ethan or Lyra, the unused character will now actually be a small supporting character that travels the region with a Meryl. They act as a tutorial in some places, like with catching and breeding, and is the grandchild to the daycare couple right outside of Goldenrod. In Goldenrod, you're now required to get the radio card before fighting Whitney. Talking about more impactful changes to the story, one of the most apparent is the increased role the Kimono Girls have. Previously, you'd save them from Team Rocket and Ecruteak to get Surf and never see them again. Now, individual members will appear throughout your journey and are more intrinsically tied to Ho-Oh and Lugia, depending on your version. Speaking of which, you're now actually required to battle your box legend before you're able to travel east of New Barktown. When encountering your bird, there's a ritual from the Kimono Girls as well as a cutscene showing the legendary's arrival. On the topic of legendaries, Suicune's role is extended into Kanto. Instead of battling it at the Tin Tower, after encountering it in Cianwood, you can now cross paths in Vermilion, then on Route 14 east of Fuchsia, and then you could finally battle it on Route 25 north of Cerulean after defeating Misty. Team Rocket now has some named admins instead of faceless executives. There's Proton, who you meet in Slowpoke Well, Petrol and Ariana in the Rocket Hideout, and their de facto leader Archer, who leads the takeover of the radio tower. The infiltration is slightly different, with you attempting to don a Team Rocket uniform as a disguise. The rival Silver also had a few additions to his character, although some of these are tied to an event that I'll go into later. After battling him in Mount Moon, you could find him training in the Dragon's Den, and you'll even be able to battle alongside him against Claire and Lance in a multi-battle. Let's go over some of the general changes made in these remakes from the originals. One of the most advertised of which is that a majority of the gyms both in Johto and Kanto have been redesigned, usually adding puzzles where there previously weren't any. That means that Chuck's and Claire's gym puzzles no longer require HMs to complete, which is nice. I think the only gyms that weren't really changed are Jasmine's, Brock's, Surge's, Janine's, and Sabrina's. All gym leaders can now be rematched by obtaining their phone number and calling them on a specific day and time, after which they'll wait for you in Kanto's fighting dojo. All their teams will range from level 50 to 70. The Elite Four and Champion now also have rematch teams. All of these rematch teams have drastic roster changes, including Pokemon from all 4 existing generations at the time. I don't really have any notes on the rematch team front. I think they're all great. 2 HMs were now included, Rock Smash and Rock Climb. Smash being usable after beating Falconer, and Climb not being available until after obtaining all 16 badges and being required to traverse Mount Silver. I like that they made Mount Silver a much longer and daring trek, and even removing the need for Flash, but I hate that one of your team members is subjected to no rock climb. Thankfully, it didn't affect me too much, but I feel for the people who want to use every move slot that they have efficiently. The biggest general change is the absolute glow up they gave to Kanto. Like I mentioned in my Gold and Silver video, while Kanto was included, there were areas that were shortened or removed altogether to seemingly save on cartridge space. In the DS era, this is no longer an issue, and the developers really took advantage of that. Viridian Forest, Cerulean Cave, and the Seafoam Islands have all been completely restored. The Kanto legendaries are now also catchable, with Moltres being yet again moved, now to Mount Silver. Fuchsia City even received the Pal Park to replace the defunct Safari Zone, Pal Park being a facility where you can transfer your Pokemon up from Gen 3 games. This iteration of Johto has a staggering amount of new and mostly exclusive features and mechanics. Oddly enough though, HGSS did leave one mostly Johto exclusive feature behind in Gen 2, that being the ability to get decorations for your room. While this wasn't the most fleshed out or impactful feature, I would have loved to see an expanded version of that concept here. I'm honestly not sure why this feature hasn't been tried again or expanded on in future games. Players love customization, so being able to make your room your own is a no-brainer in my opinion. Either way, when it comes to the additions, the most obvious and iconic of which is the following Pokemon feature. HGSS was the first game to allow any of your Pokemon to follow behind you as you traverse the world. The Pokemon in the lead slot in your party will be the one following you unless they're knocked out, in which case it'll go down the list. You can interact with them too, with there being a surprising amount of dialogue. They can even give you items to dress them up in a photo booth, which is a feature borrowed from Diamond and Pearl. They'll also have specific things to say depending on the location, with specific Pokemon having exclusive dialogue in a special area for them. To this day, the only iteration of this feature that outshined HGSS is Let's Go's implementation, but that was limited to Gen 1 Pokemon only, while this includes every Pokemon until the end of Gen 4. Going back to features borrowed from Diamond and Pearl, ball capsules and seals are also present, which is one of my favorite ways to express your Pokemon. I unfortunately didn't know you could obtain them until long after I completed the game, so I wasn't able to take advantage of it, but I absolutely encourage anyone playing to do so by first curing the sick Miltank on Route 39. Talking about location-specific additions though, there's photo spots scattered throughout both regions where you could take a picture with you and your current party. This is a small yet incredibly impactful change and goes a long way in helping me bond with my teammates. Another small addition that isn't technically new, but was only done once before and never again after, is the transition screens when entering a cave or forest. The only other set of games to do this was FRLG, but these games take it a step further by including Pokemon in the artwork, which changes depending on the time of day. The Johto region also has new locations, with the most obvious of which being the new expansion west of Cianwood City. This new area, unlocked after healing Amphi in the lighthouse, includes 2 new routes, a small cave, and the return and final iteration of the Safari Zone. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of this Safari Zone's quirks, but while you are no longer limited to a step counter, there are 12 different biomes that house different Pokemon, some of which used to be exclusive to the post-game. You're eventually granted ownership of the zone and can customize what biomes fill the 6 sections. Another area is the Battle Frontier, which is located where Crystal's Battle Tower was right outside of Olivine. This Battle Frontier is a carbon copy of the one seen in Platinum, but don't mistake that for a bad thing. I'll go into more detail in the eventual Platinum video and give a brief overview here. The Frontier has 5 battling facilities. There's the obvious and standard Battle Tower, the Battle Hall, which focuses on facing teams of a single type, the Battle Castle, which has you scoring points based on your performance and spending those points on various buffs or advantages, the Battle Arcade, which centers around a roulette that attempts to make each match have some sort of low-level gimmick, like statusing all of your Pokemon before the battle or giving them berries to hold. Lastly, there's the Battle Factory, which has you renting Pokemon instead of using your own, which is my personal favorite. I've never been much into battle facilities and find the grind for BP way more time consuming than it's worth, but I did get some enjoyment out of this, but never intend to attempt to beat each facility boss. To round out the bigger activities, let's talk about the HGSS exclusive Pokeathlon. The name may clue you in that this side activity located between Goldenrod and the National Park is the closest thing to the Pokemon Olympics. In this mode, you pick 3 of your Pokemon to participate in one of 5 sets of courses, each based around 5 HGSS exclusive stats called performance stats. They are speed, power, skill, stamina, and jump. Like normal stats, they are innate and different for each Pokemon, although what makes them differ is that they're measured with a scale of 0 to 5 stars. These stats can even be boosted or reduced by the new Apper Blender, an item that gives Apricorns a new use outside of making subpar Pokeballs. Anyways, each stat course has 3 events that are always the same and sometimes overlap with other courses. There are 10 events in total. I'm not going to cover all of these, but they are exclusively played using the touchscreen. My personal favorites are Block Smash and Lamp Jump. Your reward for playing and especially winning is points, which can be spent on a handful of items which rotate stock each day. The selection includes apricorns, healing items, evolution stones, and miscellaneous items like nuggets, rare candies, heart scales, King's Rock, and metal coat. This is the best place in the Johto games to get evolution stones, although some like the Dusk, Dawn, and Shiny stones are only available once you beat the league. Honestly, if I had known about the stone availability, my team composition in this and Crystal would have likely had some alterations. This side mode is surprisingly deep and has a lot to go for, and is even playable with 3 other players in wireless multiplayer. I've always liked the Pokeathlon, with it being one of my favorite side activities, despite me never really caring for many of the other ones. The last thing I want to talk about is actually a negative alteration in my opinion. HeartGold and SoulSilver outside of Japan were the first games to not include a traditional game corner, due to laws on gambling in games requiring a higher age rating which the developers didn't view as worth keeping it around for. In place of the slot machines here is Voltorb Flip, which is a Minesweeper-like game. I don't really care for this game, but would probably prefer it to the random nature of the slots. My issue arises with the fact that the removal of the slots also came with the removal of the ability to buy the coins outright. Meaning that if you want any of said rewards like the few Pokemon, or in my case, TMs like Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, you have to actually play the game. I ended up deciding to forego the TMs and suffer without them, which definitely left an impact leading into the league. Games after this point wouldn't even have a building for the game corner, with remakes like Let's Go and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire having the building present but no games playable and coins purchasable. There's one more exclusive feature tied to HGSS, but I feel as though it's better suited for the next section. I want to take the time to briefly talk about one of the most odd yet charming features of HGSS. Before I do though, I want to apologize for the lack of quality footage, as it's impossible to capture this device in any way that looks good, and I don't even have access to mine. The Pokewalker is an accessory included with all new copies of HeartGold and SoulSilver that gives you an additional and unique way to obtain Pokemon. The device acts as a pedometer, tracking your steps while also allowing you to catch Pokemon and travel the real world with one of your own. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the entire Pokewalker game revolves around a currency known as Watts that you generate by walking around in real life. You spend these in 3 ways: initiating wild Pokemon battles, looking for items, and unlocking new areas. The battle system is extremely primitive, only having the options to attack, evade, or catch. Each Pokemon has 4 HP each, and all attacks are the same, doing 1 damage each. The Pokemon you can find are determined by the area you choose to take a stroll in, with more expensive areas wielding rarer Pokemon. You wirelessly connect it to your DS and can transfer any items or Pokemon you receive to your copy of HG or SS. You choose to travel with a Pokemon from your game, which is the Pokemon you use to battle. I haven't used one of these since the game's release, but I remember having fun with it for its novelty. Now I want to talk about any differences involving Pokemon availability. HGSS unfortunately did not take cues from Crystal when factoring in encounters, so the likes of Phanpy and Teddiursa are once again relegated to only being obtainable once you have 7 badges. That also means that Sneasel is locked to the post-game. But hey, at least Mareep and Remoraid are back! A very small silver lining is that you can actually use the Slugma now through a gift egg in Violet City. But when it comes to eggs, the odd egg is not present, making any Pokemon exclusive to that unavailable. The Safari Zone and new routes connected to it make some Pokemon available for your journey, most notably Misdreavus, Steelix, Clefairy, Murkrow, and Larvitar. Although unfortunately Misdreavus and Murkrow can't be evolved before Kanto since the Dust Stone is post-game only. That's actually a gripe that I have with these games. One of my favorite aspects of Gen 4 is the addition of several new evolutions to older Pokemon. HGSS barely takes advantage of this by only allowing you to use 5 of the 17 new evolutions. Those 5 only managed to be available because of their evolution method not requiring an external item. What bugs me the most is that some Pokemon that have location-based evolutions like Magnezone, Leafeon, and Glaceon aren't possible since Johto doesn't contain a magnetic area, mossy rock, and ice rock. I feel as though it would have been incredibly easy to make Mount Mortar the magnetic area, then add the rocks to the Ilex Forest and Ice Path respectively. Hell, the power plant doesn't even count as a magnetic area. What's up with that? I would have loved to use several of these evolutions, but had to settle for my favorites among the 5 available ones. While not a worthy consolation, you're now given a choice of a Kanto starter from Oak and a Hoenn starter from Steven after beating Red. Another way to get both Hoenn and Sinnoh Pokemon is via the Hoenn and Sinnoh sounds on the Pokegear. And playing the sounds gives you a decent chance to encounter some of those region-specific Pokemon in all areas of both regions. The Hoenn sound only plays on Wednesdays and the Sinnoh sounds is on Thursdays. The pool for both of these is small but not insignificant, although for some odd reason Meditite is encountered using the Sinnoh sound instead of Hoenn. Circling back to Teddiursa and Phanpy, HeartGold and SoulSilver have almost identical version exclusive Pokemon to their Gold and Silver counterparts. The only exception is that the Teddiursa and Phanpy lines have swapped, meaning the Ursas are now in SoulSilver, while the Fans are in HeartGold. Besides that, there are a few post-game only Pokemon that are exclusive to either version. The notable ones in my opinion are the Eon Duo and the Weather Legendary Duos from Hoenn. You can catch either Kyogre or Groudon in the new section of Johto after defeating Red, with a bonus Rayquaza if you have them both, while Latios and Latias are roaming Kanto after obtaining the Mimic's Pokédoll. Speaking of roamers, I actually intended on catching them this time. It's actually much easier to track them since viewing your town map will show any roamer's active location, making it much easier than digging through the Pokédex for one of their locations. However, this wasn't enough to make me want to spend the time and resources to try to find and catch them. These games, similar to any other Gen 4 or 3 game, are packed full of events that were only accessible for a limited time. HGSS are especially guilty of this, containing an event that has you travel to an exclusive area called the Sinjo Ruins, and has you obtaining a level 1 legendary of your choosing from the DPP trio if you bring an event Arceus. A much simpler one is the Enigma Stone event, allowing you to catch the other Lati twin in Pewter City. The Ilex Forest has 2 events associated with it. One requiring an event Shiny Pichu, which allows you to obtain the exclusive Spiky Eared Pichu, which is exclusive to HGSS and cannot be transferred out. The other is that if you bring an event Celebi, you'll travel through time to see what Giovanni was doing through the end of RBY/FRLG up to the Radio Tower takeover. It's here you learn 2 important details, those being that Giovanni heard the radio broadcast and intended to rejoin Team Rocket but was defeated by the time-traveling player, and also that he's the father of the rival Silver, which is a pretty big bombshell. The last event I want to talk about is one that's more personal to me. In the winter of 2011, for a period of 6 weeks, you could obtain a shiny Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. The first 3 weeks you could only obtain them by visiting GameStop in North America. 1 week for each beast. Then, the 3 following weeks they were available more widely through connecting to Wi-Fi. I obtained Entei and Suicune but missed Raikou since I didn't learn about the event until the final 2 weeks, making my collection forever incomplete. That is, unless you know about how the events have been revived and will live on forever through a fan server allowing you to get any events in Gen 4 and 5. I have yet to claim my Raikou since Gen 4 requires you to connect to a non-password protected network, which I as a degenerate iPhone user don't have super easy access to, but I'll have it one day. Now it's time for my favorite part of my Pokemon videos, where I talk about the team I used for this video. I rounded out my 3rd Johto journey picking the fire starter Typhlosion, with it being my 2nd favorite of the starters. I named it Rainier after the volcano in Washington. Soon after, in Dark Cave, I caught Bee the Crobat, which was brutal to train until it learned Bite. Those 2 were my only team members for a good while until I eventually obtained the Good Rod in order to catch Helium the Quillfish, who surprised me being a great utility Pokemon. After that, my last 3 team members were caught one right after the other, starting with Doc Ock the Octillery via Good Rod on Route 44. Then Angela the Tangrowth also on Route 44, and finally Yuki the Mamoswine in Ice Path. Thank you to Ben6875 for suggesting Octillery's nickname, and Lunadium/Viper073 for both Tangrowths and Mamoswines. The MVP was pretty clear cut this time around. Even though he didn't join my team until it was time for the final gym, Yuki the Mamoswine was far and away my best team member. It was the ace up my sleeve against Lance both times and helped immensely against Claire and the other members of the Elite Four besides Bruno, plus Red. I'm gonna be honest, this team composition was not my best work. Both the Quillfish types were overlapped by Crobat and Octillery, not to mention that I only had half a team until I had 7 badges. The original idea was for Quillfish to be using Crystal and Jolteon to be used here. That changed when I falsely thought that Thunderstones were only obtainable via phone call or post-game only. In hindsight, I think I should have waited to use Gyarados here, taking full advantage of the physical special split and Intimidate. I just couldn't resist hearing the Gen 2 shiny sound. I'll go more into the specific flaws of this team in the difficulty section, but overall I enjoyed this team, especially getting to use 2 Sinnoh Pokemon. It's not my favorite team that I used so far, but I think I enjoyed it more than my Silver team, even if they didn't necessarily mesh as well. Before I move on, I also want to check in with an image showcasing all of the Pokemon I used so far out of all the available ones up to this point. I do this at the end of each set of videos. Johto adds 63 final forms, with 6 being legendaries or mythicals. HGSS also allows you to naturally use 5 Pokemon from Gen 4, so they're included on the side for now. Out of the 18 Pokemon I used throughout my 3 Johto journeys, 5 of them are from Gen 1, 11 from Gen 2, and 2 from Gen 4. I didn't realize this until working on this section of the video, but in HGSS I managed to avoid using any Gen 1 final forms, which is a feat for Johto. To put a bow on this part, you may be wondering if I'll ever use specific Pokemon. There are especially a few fan favorites from Gen 2 that seem like no-brainers. While I'm not going to go into detail, and future teams are subject to change, I plan on using a handful of older Pokemon in later generations. I also plan on eventually playing the GameCube games, which heavily favor Gen 2, so stay tuned for those, most likely after Hoenn. When it comes to the difficulty, oh boy, this game kicked my ass. Gen 4 games in general are considered some of the most difficult in the series. From Gens 2 to 4, the tools at the enemy AI's disposal have increased drastically. From abilities, to natures, to better move pools, to the physical special splits, sometimes items, smarter decision making, and even in rare cases, changes to their teams. For the most part, gym leaders of the champion and Red have had their Pokemon's levels increased. Funnily enough, Whitney is one of the few exceptions, with her team actually decreasing in levels but being just as difficult. Going back to team composition though, I'm quite disappointed since only 2 trainers received any change, those being Claire, which has a Gyarados replace one of her Dragonair, making her a lot tougher. The other is Red's Espeon being replaced by Lapras, which can be better or worse depending on your team. For me, it probably made things slightly easier, but not by much. I like this change from a story perspective, as Lapras is received as a gift from Silphco and fits Red better in my opinion. Either way, in HeartGold, I actually made it the furthest out of the 3 playthroughs without losing a battle. But it was made up for with this game now giving me the most losses out of the 7 games I played thus far, with a staggering 19 losses, with 11 of them being before the post-game. Keep in mind that I like to play with a few restrictions, those being set mode, not allowing me to switch my Pokemon out for free between KOs, not allowing the use of non-held items in battle, and for the league specifically, I do not save between each battle, meaning that if I lose against the champion, I have to fight the Elite Four all over again just to try again. I lost to 2 gym leaders, with the first being Chuck. This is the loss I'm probably most embarrassed by, especially if I had remembered that Blaze was active, then I would have won. The other gym leader I lost to was Claire, who I lost to twice. Between badges 7 and 8, I had caught half my team and went around the entire region battling any trainers I hadn't yet, saving some routes specifically for training these Pokemon. However, by the time that I was done, they still weren't on par with the rest of my team. Not even close, really. In fact, Tangle and Swinub weren't high enough in levels to evolve yet. I knew I'd have to grind, which I did against wild Pokemon south of Blackthorn. This marks the first time thus far that I've had to grind for something other than the league or post-game. I first went in with my new members around level 30 and lost decisively, so I leveled up a little more to evolve Tangela and Piloswine. After that, I lost again, but it was much closer. After refining my strategy, I beat the final Johto gym. This stretch of the game was brutal for me, because while I did get over the hurdle that is the final gym, I ran into an even bigger one in the Pokemon League. As per usual, I grinded up all of my Pokemon to level 40 and proceeded to lose to Bruno of all people. That was completely on me though, letting my Crobat get hit by Counter. I also lost to Will once, which wasn't a good look either. I was able to make it to Lance a few times, but was outmatched each time. The biggest sticking point being a team member he and Claire both shared, their Gyarados. I would argue that it was the single most problematic Pokemon for me in this playthrough. In my past 2 runs, Gyarados has been a non-factor due to having fantastic electric types. This time, however, not only did I not have one, but I didn't even really have any electric moves to use. I knew about Octillery being able to learn Charge Beam via TM, but thought that it was only obtainable in the power plant in Kanto. I didn't realize till much later that there's another copy in Olivine. That information may have prevented me from giving in and leveling up to 42. I even resorted to teaching Tangrowth Natural Gift, a move that's type and power is determined by the berry you're holding, so I made it hold a Pecha Berry, which made it electric type. That didn't end up moving the needle. Something that did help was using Heart Scales at the move reminder to reteach Crobat Screech, which was one of the best things I could have done for my team. I ended up losing to Lance a total of 6 times, 4 of those being at level 40 and 2 at 42. I could have won on my first level 42 attempt, but I made a bad misplay against Aerodactyl that cost me the battle. After losing to Lance for the second time, my mind switched from mitigating losses to puzzle solving mode, sort of how I did in my Leaf Green playthrough. Now I only cared about how I could overcome this battle with my team. I love the tools that the games give you. Having access to the type-reducing damage berries from your mom is a great decision by the developers and allows for much more flexibility. It's a shame I wasn't able to get the one to allow Mamoswine to survive a Fire Blast until long after beating the rematches. Your mom also gives you the Focus Sash and Choice Scarf, which are both incredible and surgical tools. Although with the Sash, it's one-time use, so I opted to save it for Red. The Choice Scarf was crucial though for beating the Lance. The League rematch teams are much better, with every member having 6 Pokemon and their levels ranging from 58 all the way to Lance's Dragonite being 75. Despite being extra scary, I only lost to this version of Lance twice, but I was super meticulous about each attempt I did. I managed to win with my Pokemon at level 60. I just want to give a special shout out to Quillfish and my Destiny Bond strategy of it getting rid of a high octane threat. I also managed to lose the multi-battle where you team up with your rival against Claire and Lance. My only other losses came at the hands of Red, beating me 4 times and even once against Lance while grinding for Red. I started facing Red with my team around level 65, with each fight taking place after a grinding session. I won with my team at level 70. I definitely don't feel as accomplished as I did at the end of Leaf Green since I lost so much, but at the same time, with the oddball team that I had, I'm very proud of what they accomplished. Especially since most of them have questionable natures. My big wins made me feel like I was getting better at battling. As a quick footnote, since I usually brush them off, but the Kanto gyms were much more formidable this time around, with Janine actually having competently leveled Pokemon. I almost lost to Sabrina, and Blue was formidable as always. In case you're curious about Whitney, she was surprisingly not a problem this time around. I actually quite like the difficulty increase in HGSS, but man, the level curve issue is arguably worse. I'm not sure what a good solution would have been, but if another Johto game ever comes to be, I hope that this issue is addressed. I think these games set a record for the most playtime out of all of the games I've covered thus far. In addition to beating Red, I attempted to do all of the side activities at least once, as well as catch every non-roaming legendary. All of this took me a grand total of about 51 hours. I think the only game that comes even remotely close to that time is Fire Red and Leaf Green at around a measly 34 hours. These games also had by far the most grinding of any Pokemon game so far, with me grinding for 40-ish minutes before Claire, then about 2 hours before I was able to beat the League, another hour and a half for the League rematch, and finally a whopping 7 hours to be able to beat Red. Honestly, besides the huge changes in my life, the playtime itself was a large contributing factor for this video taking as long as it did. Something I didn't find out until beating the entire game was that after clearing the rocket radio tower, similar to the gym leaders, you can call to rematch normal trainers depending on the time and day. If I had known this, it would have cut down on grinding significantly, especially since their teams scale to the number of badges you have. In terms of graphics, HeartGold and SoulSilver are based off of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. The developers did a fantastic job upgrading Johto to look the best Pokemon had looked up to that point. There's so much detail in the environment, especially when it comes to the lights. The day cycle still exists and is even more dynamic, but it is a bit more subtle with the natural lighting changes. I also like the additions of turbines in New Barktown and the ability to see through the floor in the Burn Tower. And of course, the Bellchime Trail is one of the best looking locations in a Pokemon game for a reason. As for the music, HESS sounds like Gen 2 if it was made in DPP. Go figure. Gen 4 music has a certain sound or instrument that it uses in most of its songs that just scratches an itch in my brain. But I'm so musically inept that I have no idea how to describe it other than that. This game also received lots of new tracks. Pokeathlon has its own set of songs, and then there's the additions from having the Battle Frontier and Hoenn Legendary Trio. As for brand new tracks, both Ho-Oh and Lugia received their own unique battle themes, which are both great in their own right, but I personally prefer Ho-Oh's. The Legendary Beasts also had something unique done with their shared theme, where the single track from Crystal was split into 3 very similar but distinct sounding versions of each other. My favorite of those 3 is Entei's. My favorites remain basically the same. The champion theme sounds so great, and the bike theme has also been upgraded wonderfully. This is probably one of my favorite Pokemon soundtracks out of them all. Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver were released in 2010 in North America on the Nintendo DS. As a reminder, HeartGold and SoulSilver are remakes of Pokemon Gold and Silver that take some cues from the third enhanced version, Crystal. The originals and remakes release is pretty much exactly 10 years apart, so there was lots of time to refine and upgrade the experience. HD and SS, like every other DS game, are playable on any DS or 3DS/2DS system. They were only ever released once, meaning that they're not available digitally and are quite difficult to get, especially new. I'm lucky enough to own a copy of both, but if you want just one, it'll cost you at least $40 US. Be careful though, as there are a lot of fake copies masking as legit, so it's possible that actual copies are even more expensive, but you never know. If I supported emulation, which I definitely don't, I would say please save the money and just play these games the way that most people already do, for free and using your smartphone or PC. The Johto games are the most difficult to play as there's nothing close to a modern way of purchasing or playing them. The 3DS shutting off access to Gen 2 certainly didn't help. They also have yet to remake or release a newer game set in the Johto region, which is such a shame. I would adore a Legends game set in an earlier version of Johto. Hell, I would even settle for a Let's Go Johto game. I grew up with HeartGold and SoulSilver. I was pretty much the exact right age when they came out, and I have so many fond memories with them. I remember owning one of those really cool guidebooks that show you each Pokemon's location, evolution requirement, and learn set. Despite its flaws that weren't addressed, it's still an absolutely fantastic set of games. When it comes to my ranking, it honestly was really difficult on the exact placement and whether it should be above or below a specific placement. I finally came to a conclusion. Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver belong in the number 2 slot above Halo CE. I really struggled placing these games and was even debating on whether I prefer Crystal to them. I love Gen 2 so much, especially Crystal from its sounds to sprite work to colors. However, Gen 4 also holds a very special place in my heart, and while I may prefer some aspects of Crystal, I overall see myself wanting to replay and prefer HESS more. I think mainly the evolved game mechanics, following Pokemon, and photo spots is what does it for me. I can't really explain why it's above both Kirby and Halo CE. I just think I resonate with Pokemon more than Kirby, and Halo CE, while fantastic, has some parts that I'm not the most fond of. With all that said, that puts a bow on my Johto journey. I will cover Hoenn eventually, but not in the near future. Regardless though, here's most of my team for my eventual playthrough of Ruby and Sapphire. If you have any nicknames to suggest, please feel free to do so. As a quick life update, last time I checked in, I announced that I was a soon-to-be parent. I'm happy to report that I am now the father of a very happy and cute baby boy. Thank you all for sticking by and waiting for new videos to release despite the slower paced schedule. And of course, as always, thank you all so much for watching. Do you prefer the Kanto games or Johto games overall? I think my list speaks for itself. Also, what is your favorite Gen 2 Pokemon and why? Mine is Kingdom. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again sooner than last time.